On Friday, the 20th of March 26, the first day of Nowruz, the Persian New Year, the most sacred and ancient celebration in Iranian civilization, Supreme Leader Mojtaba Khamenei sent a message to the Iranian people and to the watching world, not through a press secretary, not through a spokesman, not through a military briefing or a government spokesman, reading from prepared notes. He issued it himself, published on his official Telegram channel, read on Iranian state television to a nation marking its new year, under the sound of explosions, and then distributed to every media outlet, every government, every intelligence agency on earth. And in that message, he said something that should command the serious attention of every analyst, every economist, every strategist, and every ordinary person paying $3.88 for a gallon of gas in America right now. At the moment, due to the particular unity that has been created between you, our compatriots, despite all the differences in religious, intellectual, cultural, and political origins, the enemy has been defeated. The enemy has been defeated. Khameneians had combined fasting with jihad and provided defense line as wide as the country, dealing the enemy confusing blow. So much so that he began to harder sumers, which is a sign of lack of mindfulness and the existence of cognitive weakness. Cognitive weakness. Now, before you dismiss that as wartime propaganda, before you write it off as the posturing of a government trying to save face, I need you to stay with me. Because when you lay Khamenei's words against the documented, published, verified record of what this war has actually produced, in 21 days, the evidence does not dismiss his lie. The evidence, in several critical and uncomfortable ways, supports it. Subscribe to this channel right now and hit the bell. Because what I am about to build for you is the most important analytical framework of this entire conflict. Not what each side is saying, not the truth social posts and the Telegram messages. The documented operational and economic reality of day 21. Laid against the stated objectives of the war. And what that reality tells us about who has achieved what. Subscribe, notifications, on. This is the broadcast that reframes everything. First, the Nowruz message in full, because context changes everything. The Western media covered this message in 3 sentences. They quoted, "The enemy has been defeated and moved on." What they did not tell you is the full architecture of what Khamenei said. Because the full architecture reveals a strategic mind operating on multiple levels simultaneously. He opened by marking Nowruz as the year of a resistance economy, under national unity and national security. Wantila. That phrase, resistance economy, is extraordinarily precise. It is not, we are suffering economically. It is not, the sanctions have hurt us. It is a reframing, a transformation of economic devastation into a cultural and political identity. Resistance is not what Iran is enduring. Resistance is what Iran is choosing. Actively, proudly. As a declaration of national character. He said this war took place after the enemy was disappointed with a significant popular movement in its favor, and with the illusion that if it Marty Red, the head of the regime, and a number of influential military figures, it would create fear and despair in you and our people, and cause you to leave the Arne in this way. It would realize the dream of dominating Iran and then disintegrating it. The dream of dominating Iran and then disintegrating it. That is the framing Iran is putting on Operation Epic Fury for its own population, for the Muslim world, and for the entire global South that has been watching American military power deployed in the Middle East since 2001 and drawing its own conclusions about what American interventions actually produce. He warned that Iranian officials were studying the possibility of expanding the war into additional fronts where adversaries were highly vulnerable and have little experience. He said activating them will take place if the state of war continues and serves Iranian interests. Read that carefully. Iran's supreme leader is not just claiming victory in the war being fought now. He is threatening to open new fronts in theaters where the United States has little experience and is highly vulnerable. He is telling the world that Iran's strategic options are not exhausted, that the war can expand. That is not the statement of a country that believes it is losing. He praised the axis of resistance, the Houthis in Yemen, Hezbollah in Lebanon, armed groups in Iraq, saying they are an inseparable part of the values of the Islamic Revolution and our best friends. Iran is telling its regional allies, we are still here. We are still leading. We have not broken. And our network is intact. Hit the like button right now. Because the full text of the Nowruz message, the strategic architecture of what Khamenei actually said versus the three-sentence version, the Western press wind is exactly the kind of analyptus that changes how you understand this war. Your like keeps this visible 2 seconds. Enormous difference, no. Tested against the evidence. Khamenei said, the enemy has been defeated. Bruce, let me test that claim against 6 documented, verifiable facts, not Iranian state media. The Wall Street Journal, Reuters, CNN, Goldman Sachs, the IEA. The US Treasury Department, sources that are not inclined to favor Iran's narrative. Fact 1, the Strait of Hormuz. The closure of the Strait of Hormuz has been described as the largest disruption to the global energy supply since the 1970s. Energy crisis and the largest in the history of the global oil market. Brent crude prices surpassed $126 per barrel at their peak. The most powerful navy in human history has been unable to reopen a 21-mile waterway for 21 consecutive days. Iran achieved this not with a fleet of warships, most of which have been sunk or damaged, but with mines, fast boats, shore-based missiles, drone swarms, and the credible threat of violence that sent insurance companies running and tanker captains anchoring outside the Gulf. Trump said the strait will open itself. It has not opened itself. It is still closed, and Iran is now collecting $2 million per cess HIP to let select vessels through its personally managed corridor. Fact 2, the U.S. has lifted sanctions on Iranian oil. The Trump administration temporarily lifted sanctions on 140 million barrels of Iranian oil, allowing the regime to benefit financially while the U.S. is simultaneously bombing it militarily. The country waging the most intensive bombing campaign in the Middle East in 20 years is now allowing its adversary to the world market. The Kandahar, a terrorist regime that killed its supreme leader, that destroyed its nuclear program, is now lifting its own sanctions against that regime because the economic pressure of the war on the United States has become severe enough to require it. That is not what military victory looks like. That is what strategic pressure looks like. And Iran is the one applying it. Fact 3, the administration's policy toolkit is exhausted. Trump administration officials now privately estimate that the higher prices triggered by the war could linger for months. 3 people familiar with internal discussions confirmed the administration has already exhausted all of its go-to-policy levers for alleviating the supply shock rippling through the global economy. 3 weeks in, every policy tool used, prices still at $112 per barrel. Goldman Sachs projecting elevated prices through 2027. The IEA triggered its largest emergency reserve release in history, 400 million barrels, and prices recovered within hours. The country with the most powerful military and the most sophisticated economic policy apparatus on earth has run out of conventional options for managing the consequences of a war. It started against a country with a GDP smaller than the state of Texas. Fact 4, Trump called his own allies cowards. Trump called NATO allies cowards for their 2S warred on Iran, branding the Western military alliance. Trump posted, as allies don't want to help open the Strait of Hormuz, a simple military maneuver. That is the single reason for the high oil prices. A simple military maneuver that the United States cannot execute alone after 21 days. With 2 carrier strike groups, a Marine amphibious assault force, and the full weight of the most powerful military in human history in the region, That when the leader of the world's dominant military power calls his own allies cowards because none of them will follow him into a strait, he cannot reopen without them. That is Dipen Mena's cognitive weakness, documentive weakness, document. Fact 5. The Iranian population did not rise up. The central strategic premise of Operation Epic Fury, as stated by U.S. and Israeli officials before and during the war, was that sufficiently intense military pressure on Iran's leadership and infrastructure would trigger a popular uprising. The Iranian people, freed from the tyranny of the regime by American bombs, would finish the job themselves. Trump himself admitted, "I can fully understand why Iranian citizens have not risen up to overthrow the regime." He understands it. He does not deny it. The uprising did not come. Iranian Mada's swift appointment as a strategic defeat, and Israel going that Allah Khamenei's killing was meant to trigger systemic collapse. The system is resilient. The Supreme Leader is governing. The IRGC is intact. The axis of resistance is operational. And the Iranian people, whatever their private feelings about their government, have not taken to the streets to welcome American liberation. Fact 6. Iran fired ballistic missiles at Diego Garcia. Iran fired 2 ballistic missiles at the Diego Garcia military base in the Indian Ocean, run jointly by the U.S. and the United Kingdom. Diego Garcia sits approximately 3,900 kilometers from Iran. It hosts American B-2 stealth bombers, the same aircraft conducting strikes on Tehran. After 21 days of the most intensive bombing campaign in the Middle East since 2003, after having its ballistic missile production capacity described as functionally defeated by the U.S. top secret, Iran reached 3,900 kilometers across the Indian Ocean and fired at the base that houses the planes bombing it. That is not the capability profile of a militarily defeated nation. Don't go anywhere, because the most important part of this broadcast comes next. The part that even Khamenei's supporters in Iran might not have fully calculated yet. The part that makes his victory claim simultaneously correct and dangerously incomplete. The paradox at the heart of the Nowruz message. Here is the thing about Khamenei's victory claim that deserves honest analysis. Not to undermine it, the 6 documented facts above support it in critical ways, but to complete it, because the claim of victory, if believed too completely inside Iran, carries its own risks. The full Nowruz message named this the year of resistance economy. Resistance economy. Let's talk about what that actually means for ordinary Iranians. More than 2,300 people have been reported killed in Iran, including over 1,300 civilians, and nearly 200 children under the age of 12. Shoppers were out in Tehran's markets buying Nowruz gifts, though sidewalks were less packed than usual. Many people had fled north, fewer people, quieter streets. A Nowruz celebrated in the shadow of explosions heard from the eastern and northern parts of Teftah. Qatar's Ras Laffan facility, which supplies 70% of Iran's domestic gas needs through South Pars, the shared gas field, suffered extensive damage after Israeli strikes. Iraq lost power generation after Iran halted gas supplies in the wake of the attack. The damage will cost an estimated $20 billion annually and will take up to 5 years to repair. The resistance economy is a real economy of real pain, of families who fled north to escape bombs, of children killed in strikes on residential areas of a gas field that powers Iranian homes damaged in ways that will take years to fix. Khamenei honors those losses in his message. He calls the dead martyrs. He offers condolences to their families. He speaks of grief sitting alongside celebration on Nowruz. The message is not callous about the human cost. It is deeply aware of it. But the question that history will ask, the question that ordinary Iranians in those quieter than usual Tehran markets were probably asking themselves on Nowruz morning while hearing explosions, is not whether Iran's strategic position constitutes victory by the metrics Khamenei has chosen. The question is, what does that victory cost the people who are living it? Subscribe right now if you haven't already. Hit the bell, because this questioned the gap between strategic victory and human cost, between the resistance economy framing and the actual experience of Iranians marking Nowruz under bombs is the most important Andwansred question of this entire conflict. And it will shape what comes next. Subscribe, notifications on. The contradictory words and nonsense, Khamenei's most precise observation. Khamenei said the enemy had been dealt a blow, so much so that he began to utter numerous contradictory words and many absurdities, which is a sign of lack of mindfulness and the existence of cognitive weakness. This is the line the Western press treated as propaganda. Let me show you why. It is actually the most precisely documented claim in the entire Nowruz message. Here is the transcript of Trump's statements in the 7 days before Nowruz. In order, attributed and verifiable. Friday the 20th of March, Trump posts on social media that the U.S. is getting very close to meeting our objectives as we consider winding down military efforts. Same Friday, the 20th of March, officials confirm thousands more U.S. troops are being sent to the Middle East. Winding down, sending thousands more simultaneously. Trump says he does not want to do a ceasefire. He tells reporters, you don't do a ceasefire when you are literally obliterating the other side. Also this week, the U.S. lifts sanctions on the side it is obliterating. Obliterating. While lifting sanctions simultaneously, Trump says Iran is eager to negotiate. Iran's foreign minister publicly states, Iran has not asked for a ceasefire and does not want one. Trump says the strait will open itself. The strait has not opened itself. Iran is charging $2 million per sependes cells. Thistles through. Trump calls his NATO allies cowards and brands the alliance paper without the U.S. swelt. Simultaneously calling on those same cowardly paper tiger allies to send warships to reopen the strait. Please send ships, you cowards. That sequence documented in Trump's own words over 7 days is what Khamenei is describing when he writes contradictory words and many absurdity. He is not making it up. He is reading the news, and the news is providing him with more evidence than he could have scripted himself. Drop a prediction in the comments right now. Do you think Trump's contradictory messaging is a deliberate, negotiating strategy, keeping Iran guessing? Or is it genuine confusion about the war's objectives and timeline? Comment below. I read every single one. And if this analytical framework, testing Khamenei's victory claim against the documented evidence, rather than dismissing it, is giving you a clearer picture of this war than you've had, hit the like button. These breakdowns take hours. Your support keeps this channel doing the work. What victory actually means, and why both sides are claiming it simultaneously. And both might be right. Here is the central analytical insight of this broadcast. The one that makes the Nowruz message genuinely important, rather than mere interesting. The United States and Iran are not fighting by the same definition of victory. They never were. And the failure to understand that distinction is the reason this war is in the position it is on day 21. The United States defined victory as destroy Iran's nuclear program, degrade its military capability, trigger regime change through a combination of overwhelming military force and popular uprising, reopen the Strait of Hormuz, demonstrate to China, Russia, and every other challenger that American military power is unchallengeable. Weeks in, nuclear program destroyed military degraded. A straight, still closed fine-tea demonstration of unchallengeable powers. Paul Kurzant debarred. Sanction lifted on the bombed adversary. Iran defined victory as survive, still govern, keep the strait closed long enough to impose maximum economic pain. Force the United States to exhaust its policy toolkit. Maintain national unity rather than fragmenting under. Military pressure demonstrate to the Muslim world and the global South that Iran can absorb American bombs and keep functioning as a state. 3 weeks in surviving Sun Tea. Still governing Santine, Strait closed for 21 days, the largest energy disruption in history. U.S. policy toolkit exhausted, Sinai national unity. Maintained no uprising Baintan. Demonstration of resilience to the Muslim world. Issued on Nowruz, the most watched day in the Iranian. Yoti wanton tortirasand. The Ranti Storashan, by its own definition of victory, Iran is winning. That is not opinion. That is a checklist evaluated against stated objectives. Khamenei's message called this the year of resistance economy under national unity and national security, naming each of the three pillars of Iran's definition of victory: economic resistance, national unity, and security of the state. He is not claiming Iran won a military war. He is claiming Iran won the war it was actually fighting, which was always a war of will, endurance, and strategic reticence against a technological superior adversary that underestimated both. He predicted that our unity will certainly become stronger and more solid, and your enemies will become humble and less powerful in the coming year. Humble and less powerful. Look at Trump calling NATO cowards. Look at the Shy Summit delayed. Look at the sanctions lifted. Look at the policy toolkit exhausted. Look at the administration saying the strait will open itself, as if divine intervention is now the plan. Is that humble? Not yet, but is it less powerful than it was on the 27th of February? The day before the war started, when the United States was the unchallenged hegemon of the Middle East, and nobody charged $1. 2 million toll on the Strait of Hormuz. Objectively, measurably, yes, the Nowruz message as history. What Iran is building for the long term. I want to step back from the day-to-day and show you what Khamenei is actually doing. With this message in historical and civilizational terms. Because it is more significant than its immediate. Military key. Militanist. Iranian state media has already begun the process of recasting Khamenei as a wartime commander general of the revolution. Hardline outlets framed the succession as a strategic defeat. For the United States, arguing that Ali Khamenei's killing was meant to trigger systemic collapse, and that the swift appointment of his successor demonstrated the system's resilience. Iran is writing the first draft of how this war will be taught in Iranian schools for the next 50 years. And the Nowruz message issued on the most culturally resonant day of the Iranian calendar. Combining the Persian New Year with Eid al-Fitr in a rare coincidence that happens once every 33 years is the foundational document of that narrative. The narrative is the United States and Israel thought they could kill our leader and break our nation. They killed our leader. Our nation did not break. We endured. We resisted. We dealt the enemy a dizzying blow. We began a new year under bombs, yes, but together in unity, stronger than before. That narrative, true or not, in every particular, has enormous power in Iranian culture. The Iran-Iraq War of the 1980s, which killed hundreds of thousands of Iranians and lasted 8 years, is still called the sacred defense in Iranian discourse. A war in which Iran suffered enormous losses is remembered as a victory of national character over external aggression. Khamenei said, on the one hand, for the general public, this is the first year that our martyred leader and other noble martyrs are not among us. In particular, the hearts of the families and survivors of the martyrs are grieving for their loved ones. He is holding both things simultaneously. Grief and defiance, loss and resistance. The acknowledgement that people are dead, his own family among them, his father killed, his wife killed, his child killed, and the insistence that their deaths did not produce what the enemy intended. That is not the statement of a regime in collapse. That is the statement of a government that has survived the worst and is now building the cultural and political foundation for whatever comes next. The economic reality on Nowruz morning, which the market assessed independently of any speech. While Khamenei's message was being read on Iranian state television, while Tehran's markets were quieter than usual, but still open, still buying, still celebrating, the global financial market was making its own assessment of who is winning this war. It was not reading Telegram. It was reading balance sheets. On Nowruz Friday, the S&P 500 ended sharply lower. Brent crude 3.3% to dollar, 112.19 per barrel, the highest level of the entire war, not recovering, not stabilizing, still rising on day 21. Goldman Sachs suggested that higher prices could last through 2027. U.S. gasoline prices rose to $3.88 per gallon, the highest in more than 2 years. European natural gas surged as much as 35% to more than double pre-war levels. Qatar's Ras Laffan, home to the world's largest LNG export plant, suffered extensive damage that will cost $20 billion annually and take 5 years to repair. Kuwait's Mina Al Ahmadi refinery was hit by drone strikes causing fires. Saudi Arabia's Samref refinery on the Red Sea was struck. Iraq lost power. Generation. Every one of those numbers, the Brent price, the gas prices, the Goldman Sachs forecast, the refinery fires, the 5-year repair timeline for Reuters Lafand, strategy of economic disruption through Hormuz closure, and regional energy infrastructure strikes is working exactly as designed. Your groceries, fertilizer, supply chains broken for 21 days. South Asia's planting season window closing. The food inflation building in the background will not show up at your GWAT store this week. It will show up in late 2026 through 2027. It is already locked in. Your gas, $3.88 nationally. And Lemiming. Goldman Sachs through 2027, the Iran levy dollar. 2 million toll on every vessel that passes through Hormuz flows through the supply chain into every barrel priced at the pump. Retirement, S&P 500 down significantly. Since the 28th of February energy, the only sector winning. If Goldman Sachs is right about 2027, the market repricing of that reality has barely started. The market, which operates on data, not speeches, assessed the Nowruz message the same way it has assessed every other development in this war. Prices went up. That is the market agreeing with Khamenei's claim, not because it endorses his politics, but because the economic evidence of who is inflicting more pain on whom is written in the price of every barrel of crude. Subscribe right now, hit the bell, because the economic evidence underpinning the Nowruz victory claim is the most important and most undercovered dimension of this story. Subscribe. Notifications on when the next economic data point breaks, when the next oil price surge, the next refinai rake, the next Goldman Sachs forecast update lands. I will be here the hour it happens. Iran fires at Diego Garcia, the military evidence that cannot be ignored. On the same day as the Nowruz message, Iran fired 2 ballistic missiles at the Diego Garcia military base in the Indian Ocean, run jointly by the U.S. and the United Kingdom. Diego Garcia, 3,900 kilometers from Iran, the base that houses the B-2 stealth bombers conducting strikes on Tehran. A joint US-UK facility at the strategic center of the American military's global power projection in the Indian Ocean. Iran fired ballistic missiles at it. After 21 days of the most intensive American bombing campaign in the Middle East in decades, after having its ballistic missile production capacity described by Secretary Hegseth as functionally defeated, after losing nuclear facilities, missile storage bunkers, naval vessels, command structures, and air defense systems across the country. After all of that, Iran reached 3,900 kilometers across the Indian Ocean and demonstrated that its strategic strike ability extends to the very base housing the planes bound. Khamenei's message said studies have been conducted regarding of other fronts in which the enemy has little experience and is highly vulnerable. He said activating them will take place if the state of war continues and serves Iranian interests. The Diego Garcia strike is not just a military event. It is the operational evidence behind that warning. It is Iran demonstrating on Nowruz morning that when its supreme leader says there are new fronts being studied, fronts where the enemy has little experience, he is not speaking theoretically. Khamenei is announcing capability. It's where we stand. Who is winning? The honest answer on day 22. I am going to give you the most honest analysis I can construct from the documented evidence. No spin, no partisan framing. Both sides evaluated against their own stated objectives and the verified record. The United States has achieved. Iran's nuclear program is destroyed ballistic missile. Production capacity described as functionally defeated. More than 15,000 targets struck. 90+ Iranian ships sunk or damaged. The Iranian Navy surface fleet largely eliminated. Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei killed. His successor reportedly wounded Harg Island's military infrastructure, obliterated. Iran's air defenses substantially degraded. These are real significant. Historically extraordinary in their scope. Iran has achieved the largest disruption to the global energy supply in the history of the global oil market. The Strait of Hormuz, largest, closed for 21 consecutive days. $1. 2 million toll booth established on the world's most critical waterway. Iranian oil moving at near pre-war levels through that same strait. The U.S. policy toolkit exhausted in 3 weeks. Sanctions lifted by the country conducting the bombing. NATO called cowards by the U.S. president. The XE summit delayed. Goldman Sachs forecasting elevated prices through 2027. National unity maintained. No. Uprising. A new supreme leader governing and issuing a Nowruz message, naming this the year of the resistance economy. Ballistic missiles reaching Diego Garcia, 3,900 kilometers away. By the U.S. definition of victory, partial. Nuclear threat eliminated. Regime change failed. Strait still closed. By Iran's definition of victory, substantially achieved. Survive. Govern, close the strait, exhaust the enemy's options. Maintain unity, demonstrate resilience to the world. Khamenei called it a gross miscalculation. The belief that killing Iran's leaders would cause the people to leave the arena. The people did not leave the arena. On Nowruz morning, with bombs falling on Tehran, they went to the markets and bought new clothes and gifts for the new year. Quieter than usual, less crowded, but there. Celebrating persisting. That persistence, that stubborn, ancient 3,000-year-old Persian to be broken by external. Force is what Khamenei is classy, and the evidence says he is not wrong too. Claim it, the message that matters most. And it was not directed at Trump. Here is the final piece of the Nowruz analyse as Western coverage. Missed entirely. Al Jazeera's Ali Hashim, reporting from Tehran, noted that Khamenei attempted to deliver a conciliatory message to countries in the region that have been affected by the war, acknowledging the huge mistrust and lack of confidence those countries now feel toward Iran. He called on Afghanistan and Pakistan to end their fighting and said he stood ready to assist. I appeal to our two brotherly countries, Afghanistan and Pakistan, to establish better relations with each other, and I myself am ready to take the necessary actions, he said. He is not just talking to Iranians. He is not just taunting Trump. He is conducting diplomacy. In a telegram message, read on state television with bombs going off in the background of Tehran. He is telling the Muslim world, Iran is still here, still governing, still capable of regional leadership, still interested in being a constructive force on its own terms, by its own definition. What constructive means. And he is telling the Gulf states, the Arab neighbors, the countries that have been bombed by Iranian missiles and are furious about it. We have our differences, yes. But our argument is with the Americans and Israelis, not with you. He denied that Iran or its allied forces were responsible for attacks against Turkey or Oman, calling them false flag incidents used by Iran's enemy to sow discord among neighbors. Whether that denial is true or not, and it is disputed. The diplomatic intent is clear. Iran is working to separate itself from the regional damage it has caused, to rebuild the relationships for a post-war world in which it is still standing, still governing, and still climbing the strategic high ground of a country that was attacked. And Serviev. That is not the regional strategy of a government that believes it is losing. Where we stand, the 21st of March, 2026, day 22, the full picture. Supreme Leader Mojtaba Khamenei issued Iran's Nowruz message on the 20th of March, declaring the enemy. Defeated, the Iranian people united. And this year, the year of the resistance economy. Simultaneously, a religious Eid and a national celebration of survival. The full text called the war a second imposed war, placing it in the lineage of the Iran in performing American. An Israeli military action as forcing a druss, as for saying aggression against a sovereign people. Not a counter-proliferation campaign. Trump said he is considering winding down and simultaneously sending more troops. Said Iran wants a deal. Iran said it does not. Called NATO cowards. Said the Strait will open itself. Brent crude at $112.19 on Nowruz Friday, highest of the war. The S&P 500 down sharply. Goldman Sachs projects elevated prices through 2027. Iran fired 2 ballistic missiles at Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean. Iran's parliament speaker says the Strait will never return to pre-war status. Iran's toll booth charges, $2 million per sip. Iran's own oil moves at near pre-war levels through the same strait. The U.S. policy toolkit is exhausted. The IEA's largest ever reserve release deployed, sanctions lifted. Allies called cowards, strategy shifting daily. And on the first day of the Persian New Year, a celebration 3,000 years older than the Islamic Republic, older than Islam itself, ancient as Iran's fistant, as a civilization. Message to his people and to the world. He said, we combined fasting with jihad. We created a defense line as wide as the country. We dealt the enemy a dizzying blow. The enemy has been defeated. And then the market opened, and Brent crude rose 3.3%. And Goldman Sachs said through 2027. And the Strait remained closed. Who is winning? Iran is not winning the war. It did not start. More than 2,300 Iranians are dead. More than 1,000 of them civilians. Their nuclear program is gone. Their military is degraded. Their cities shake. With explosions on the first morning of the Persian New Year. But Iran is winning the war it chose to fight. The war of endurance, of strategic patience. Of national unity in the face of overwhelming force. Of economic disruption imposed through a 21-mile waterway that the most powerful military in human history cannot reopen on day 22. That is Khamenei's argument, delivered on Nowruz to 4 billion people watching the price of oil. To the Muslim world, watching whether Iran survives. To history, which will judge both and I am. The evidence behind it. Subscribe. Share this video with someone who has been watching the headlines and missing the framework for understanding what they mean. The Nowruz message is not just a speech. It is Iran's declaration of its own definition of this war, and a challenge to America's definition that the documented evidence uncomfortably partily supports. Evidence first, analysis second. You decide what it means. But right now, on the first day of the Persian New Year 1405, Iran's Yibai Sidem. Leader says the enemy has been defeated. And the price of oil agrees with him. Subscribe. I will be here when the next chapter begins. Decornite.